Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this new episode of BHHSeries. My name is Aline and I'm the Chief International Officer of Barcelona Health Hub. So it's a pleasure to be back after the holidays. So for those of you who've never attended the BHHSeries, so they are online events that we've been organizing since March, since the first lockdown last year. And there are topics around digital health. And so 1 hour events that we organize with and for our members. And we also invite some experts from all around the world. So the new episode today is organized in collaboration with one of our members, Suvoda, and we will talk about a very hot topic, Decentralized Clinical Trials, or DCT. So I'm accompanied today by experts who will share their expertise, experience, and discuss the benefits and challenges of decentralized clinical trials. So let me introduce them to you. So first we have Dr. Aneta Voronier-Caosio. So she's Clinical Project Manager, DCT Initiative Leadership at Bayer. Then we have Dr. Andrea Zobel. She's Senior Director of Personalized Supply Chain at World Carrier. And then we've got Henk Dieteren, Clinical Supply Chain Solutions Consultant at Suvoda. Welcome, everybody. So now I will ask them to introduce themselves briefly. Henk, shall we start with you? Yep. So you can tell us who you are and what your company is doing in decentralized clinical trials. All yours.
Thank you, Aline, for the nice introduction. And thank you, dear people, to listen to us, to this great discussion. We think it's helpful for you. I'm, as Aline already said, Henk Dieteren. I'm already in clinical trials since 1992. So I started when GCP was just came into force, and after a few years being in the Netherlands, I joined Grunenthal in 2005, where I co-founded in 2010 the clinical trial supply department. We were focusing on the complete supply chain from GMP to GCP and GDP. And in this area, I was able to make myself an expert in IRT, temperature management, and also in direct-to-patient procedures. After that, I joined BioNTech for a short time period. And in October last year, I joined Suvoda as a supply chain consultant. Then, let me briefly talk a little bit about Suvoda. Suvoda is a globally trusted e-clinical solutions provider with a primary focus in the IRT. We provide solutions for pharma and biotech sponsors, as well as for CROs, to manage the material and the patient logistics in their clinical trials. And basically, it's about getting the right drug to the right patient at the right time. We focus on quickly adaptable modular systems and address increasingly complex clinical trial needs across the multiple therapeutic areas. And IIT, I think you all know, has long been a way to implement randomized trials. But increasingly, IIT has become a way to enable complex trial models, such as those with the topic we are talking about today, the decentralized features. As from 2018 onwards, so already before COVID-19 pandemic hit us, we have implemented several direct-to-patient shipments studies to enable the kinds of trials that traditionally rely on site-centric models. As IIT does a great job of being able to integrate and direct the flow of the clinical study logistics. And herewith, I would like to hand over to Andrea to introduce herself.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for this wonderful opportunity to join this panel. I'm Andrea Suvoda. I'm a gene technologist and biochemist by education. Have worked for many years in the pharmaceutical research in universities, institutes, and also biotech company. And then I moved to the clinical research area and helped also to build the clinical trial supply and logistics department in a CRO in PowerXL, moved also to pharma logistics. And so I had really quite early contact to decentralized clinical trials, to the logistics part of this. And let me introduce a little bit my company, World Courier. Since April, I'm working in World Courier, part of AmerisourceBergen. We are a specialized logistics provider for the healthcare and pharmaceutical industry. And World Courier has already started since 20 years to support patients in decentralized clinical trials, patients who need shipments of medication or ancillaries to their home, or also pick up of laboratory samples or unused drugs from their home. And so we built, because it was ramping up quite quickly, the service line and really a special team to support this type of clinical trials, to offer this logistic, of course, underlined with the right SOPs and trained teams, and of course, trained drivers, because this is the last contact to the patient. And we have seen that really in nearly all therapeutic areas, we see decentralized trials. It reaches from autoimmune, endocrine, neurology, up to oncology, but you can really not see that there's a certain focus on a certain indication. And as Hank also already explained, it was a journey really starting quite early, and even before COVID-19, many trials, not a large percentage of the overall number of trials, but a significant percentage with really double-digit rates of increasing we have seen so far. So at the moment, we have already provided more than 150,000 shipments for DTP shipments for patients' home and pick up at homes, more than 500 customers, more than 1,500 protocols in 78 countries, so nearly in all countries where you have clinical trials. And of course, during the pandemic, this was really very beneficial to have this experience and then to support clinical trials that they can continue, and or new trials, especially in the vaccine and in the medication against COVID-19. And so, this is the first service we have built up, and I'm really happy to share my experience with you.
Then let's go to Aneta. Aneta, can you introduce yourself, please?
Thank you, Hank. My name is Aneta Woronika Osio, and I'm delighted to be here and talk about decentralized clinical trials, our experience here at Bayer. I've been with Bayer since 2008. I'm a physician by training, and I have held various roles across the organization, including medical expert, clinical auditor, and clinical project manager for very large cardiovascular outcome trials. Most recently, I'm one of the leaders for the Decentralized Clinical Trials initiative at Bayer, and I specialize in managing acceptance of decentralized trials across countries, and also looking at our internal processes, how they can be optimized to support decentralized clinical trials. In terms of my company, Bayer Pharmaceutical Division is a leading innovative healthcare company. There is a lot of detail here on the slide, but I want to draw your attention here to the fact that we specialize in cardiology, oncology, hemophilia, women's healthcare, and ophthalmology. And those are areas where the decentralized clinical trials definitely are being more and more embraced by the sites and by the patients. We also have innovation in field of digital health solutions, and as we all know, technology is a big enabler for decentralized clinical trials. So we are able to offer this integrated care offerings as well. And talking about the innovation, we're also accelerating the biomedical and technological, may even call it revolution, through our cell and gene therapy platform. We're very well positioned to talk about future in the trials in the decentralized manner. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody for those introductions. So Hank, before we go further, I think it would be great if you can give us like a quick overview of decentralized clinical trials. I think maybe for some people it's not clear what it is, so it would be great if you can like shortly explain us, maybe also tell us when we use them and like a short landscape.
Yeah, I will do so. Thank you. Well, first of all, we need to ask ourselves the question, do you think that DCT is something new, that it has emerged from the measures against COVID-19 pandemic? Well, let's see what we bring. First of all, let's look a little bit into the definition, and it's quite challenging to find good definitions, but FDA and EMA have adopted the term decentralized trials for any trial that does not follow a traditional site-centered clinical trial model and instead utilizes mobile technology, local healthcare providers, telemedicine, or any measure that modifies the traditional role a site plays in a clinical trial. So this is all about how to go from the clinical site visit, the physical visits, to the patient's home and what is needed for that. So decentralized trials offer a patient-centric approach addressing various patient needs that often go unmet in traditional designs. And there are many ways to implement DCTs. They can be fully decentralized or even a hybrid clinical trial, so meaning a combination of physical and home visits. This decentralization of the traditional model shifts the patient to the center, providing access to participation in the patient's ecosystem, rather than the traditional site's ecosystem, and lessening their burden to participate. So it's quite a broad spectrum that we are talking about. To be patient-centric, sponsors need to create a better patient experience throughout the life cycle of a trial. Making trials more convenient implies one must put themselves in the shoes of the patient to understand the burden, but also the limitations that prevent or otherwise limit their participation and also the patient retention. Decentralized clinical trials allow the collection of safety and efficacy data from the study participants by using a range of digital technology that require a minimum number of site visits. Leveraging digital solutions will be important as well to creating a better experience. Some examples: e-consent and electronic clinical outcome assessment, also known as ECOA, can help to increase engagement and comprehension of protocol patients participate in. Telehealth visit facilitate communication between clinicians and patients to create trust and convenience on the patient level. Wearables can serve to further facilitate convenient decentralized solutions for patients by reducing site visits as well. Remote monitoring of clinical sites can provide greater efficiency at sites and in the overall operation of a study by centralizing data across sites. And this can only improve patients' experience with clinical nurses and other members of the study team as the study progresses. So what does the centralized global landscape look like? Let's go a little bit into the numbers and the figures. DCT components are used in the trials for the past 20 plus years. And in the table here, you can see how the total amount of trials is really considerable. After being somewhat steady for a decade, DCT trials began to increase steadily after 2011 until 2017. And of course, a big jump is seen in 2021 to trials in the therapeutic area of the infectious diseases, primarily due to COVID. North America dominates across all regions, and at country level, the most DCTs are in the USA. Finally, 23% of the DCT trials are multinational versus 77% is at country level. And here you can see that over 80% of the DCT are in phase 2, 3, and 4 with a metabolic and CNS disease leading in the therapeutic areas. The last mile, and that's where we really talk about the direct-to-patient, the last mile of the clinical trial supplies in decentralized trials is a very challenging one. How to ensure you meet the concerned GMP and GCP requirements, how to ensure the GDPR is met. This is where we would like to shed some light on in the discussion we will have later on. While technical DTP can be used almost any time, there are, of course, a few scenarios that fit best for DTP. If you look to rare diseases, where subjects are hard to find, or subjects need to travel a far distance to the sites. Long study durations, and here is important the subject's retention. IP can be dosed at home settings. That's a really important requirement, that you really have a patient being able to dose at home. Let's think about injections, regular injections or infusions where they only need to go to the hospital or the investigator site for the dosing. And then long study durations, important also for the subject retention. And last but not least, I think that the short drug shelf life is also something to consider, because if there is a short shelf life, then we can reduce the patients going to the investigator site by DTP, sending the medication to the patient directly. So now let's start the discussion, Eileen.
Thank you so much for that. And that was a really great overview and introduction of the topic. So now let's deep dive into the discussion. And I would like to start with Aneta. So can you tell us, like, at Bayer, have you run or are you currently running a study with decentralized elements?
Yes, Aline, we are actually looking into providing more patient-centric and modern ways of conducting clinical trials for quite some time. And our DCT initiative started in early 2019. Before we had the formal DCT initiative in place, there has been use of isolated elements such as e-consent, e-COA, e-PRO, e-diaries. But what we have noticed is that we can now develop a more comprehensive DCT strategy, starting with the protocol design, and that would in turn allow the optimal use of combined DCT elements whenever it makes sense and whenever it makes the trial more patient-centric. So what does it mean in practice? So currently we have one ongoing trial with DCT sites in the US, and those use telemedicine, direct-to-patient drug shipment, and home nursing. And there are some also patient engagement apps. And we are in a stage now when we are actively planning for more trials across different regions.
And Aneta, do you think that COVID has been an inflection point for decentralized trials?
Oh, for sure. So we can clearly see that before the pandemic started, we have been exploring those various elements for DCT, but it was more like, can we do it? Should we do it? What if? And then with the start of the pandemic, and some of it was really forced through lockdowns. Basically, patients were not able to come to the sites anymore. So we saw that even clinical practice evolved towards more virtual care. And of course, our clinical trials had to adapt as well. So what happened is those DCT components in general became a way more acceptable. And basically now we see that they are expected by patients and the sites. And we have also seen that regulators in countries and also ethics committees have gained some experience through COVID, how such solutions as direct-to-patient or telemedicine can actually work to benefit the patients. And what we have also seen that, again, before that there were some providers of technology, but recently is just such a proliferation of digital solutions. So there are new vendors providing solutions, but CRO partners offering DCT solutions. So we are exploring all those options, and we are also looking into how permanent those changes, those gains, in modernization will become. So will those emergency measures, for example, allowing for direct-to-patient drug shipment, become standard, reflected in regulations, especially ICH-GCP, or whether we would see some slow, like a rollback of those gains? Hopefully not.
And what about you, Andrea and Hank? What has been your experience from the vendor side?
Yeah, I can only echo Aneta, because we have seen this enormous ramp up. For comparison, before COVID, we had nearly 2,000 shipments per month, DTP shipments. This increased to more than 5,000 during COVID-19, and now we are at approximately 3,000 shipments a month. But we have seen also this hesitation of sponsors. We have done a lot of consultancy before COVID, have explained how it can work. We had already this experience from 8 years, and but still some sponsors, especially the large pharma companies, have hesitated to implement this model. But now with first-time guidance during the emergency regulations, there's more confidence, more clarity, and also confidence that it really can work. And also from the sites, from the clinical sites, from the investigators, they have now the experience that it can work. But there is still a problem with scalability of these processes. More automation, more technology support would be really appreciated to have really processes which release clinical sites and all the parties from too many manual work on communication. And here is really the point I would hand over to Hank. You can explain how IT and how IIT systems can help us.
Yep. And also I can say that we already started with decentralized elements prior to COVID, but especially during COVID, we saw an enormous increase of requests for incorporation of DTP in the initial build. And that was possible because we were thinking about, well, prepare yourself in a way that you allow the system to work on DTP. And we had a great example with one of our customers that initially set up a trial before COVID, where they wanted to test the DTP component for only one site. And then COVID hit us. And well, the sponsor came to us and re-evaluated and decided, okay, we now need to set up the DTP for all the sites. And luckily, we had prepared the IIT system in a way that DTP was possible. So without any change control, we were able to set all the sites to DTP without any time that was needed. Enrollment could continue and so on. So it was really great achievement that we had already built up experience with DTP before COVID that helped us setting up measurements during COVID. Yep.
And Anita, I would like to come back to you. Like, do you think that the trials design shifted and the supply chain strategies changed to accommodate for an increased need for flexibility of decentralization?
Absolutely. So we have seen when we were incorporating DCT components, firstly in our early adopter study, again, before pandemic, and then during the pandemic when we had adapt the ongoing trials to ensure continuity, then it really dawned on us that all of that should have started, ideally way earlier. So the benefit of early planning, and that starts before the protocol is written. Yeah, so that would allow to look holistically and provide more options and more flexible options. So for example, when we talk about DCT strategy very early in the planning, we start with the science, which data will be collected and how we will collect them. And then for that, whether digital remote solutions are possible. And then if so, then of course, would it be possible for the study drug to be shipped to patients' home? And then with that, replace on-site visits with, for example, home nursing or telemedicine, for certain study procedure. So we rely on technology and innovation more and more. But it's going back to this early planning and really thinking through, before we have a protocol written.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And now I would like to talk a bit about barriers of implementing such kind of trials. Like, that's a question for all of you, like which kind of barriers do you see? And is there any difference between the different regions?
Shall I start? Or do you want to start, Aneta?
No, go ahead.
Okay, well, we don't see any barriers in the system, but we see regulatory agencies that have a very variative approach to DCT. And there is currently no real regulation existing. The regulations currently only exist during the time of COVID, but that's besides that, there is no regulation in place. So if you then look to the possibilities in DCT, then North America has collected the most experience in this, and they are far ahead of the other regions like Europe. The additional difficulty also here in Europe is that we have different countries with different insights in DTP, different personal objectives to some kind of DTPs, and we really were able to help one of our customers in advising how to best achieve DTP design and setup in specific countries. Yeah. So, but that's from barrier point of view, I think it's mainly related to regulations.
Anita, Andrea, would you like to add something?
Yes, and I would really continue with the logistics perspective of the logistics provider. We have really three areas where we have barriers and challenges. The first is really the lack of pharmacy and medicine and product regulation. This pops up when we really have to, the pharmacist have to decide that he is able and allowed to hand over the IMP, the investigation in medicine and product, to a driver of a courier. This is really the problem that it's not finally written down in the regulation, and this pharmacist must know that this protocol was approved and there is an exemption applicable for this protocol. The next area is data privacy. We have to manage that we ship to the patient's home, know the patient address and the patient name, but this is the most confidential data. no sponsor should ever see this data, and also not the clinical teams. So we have to find a process where this confidentiality is kept, but we can really act, we can really work and can ship to the patient's home. And also the drivers, they must be clear for them that they are part of the health system, that they are the last contact to the patient, but should not start with any health discussion. Yeah? And it's also important for us as a logistics provider that we have really the assurance that the patient has agreed in the informed consent, agreed that the data are handed over to the logistics provider, and the patient is agreeing to get these shipments. So, and we must know this. Yeah, and the third area is really the communication. We have to coordinate these shipments between the patient, their caregiver, nurse, or relatives, and the site, inside pharmacy or depot for pickup, and then the courier in the middle. And we really have to make this arrangement that the shipment is arriving in time, is meeting the nurse, and to do all this coordination. This is really challenging. And for this area, we would really appreciate more technical, more support to go away from these emails, phone calls, with having more automatic bookings, automatic data transfer.
Yeah, and I think from the sponsor's perspective, you can clearly appreciate that all of those barriers or constraints affect the way we can design our trials. Yeah, so think about setting up a global trial where there is no standardization across the countries. Yeah, so some countries can do this bit, some other countries cannot. So how do we take it all together and design a global trial? So definitely a lack of standardized guidance is not helpful. And also what we see here is those contradictory sometimes interpretation of existing guidance, even regarding data privacy. So what we are hoping to see change is that once maybe a revision 3 of ICH-GCP becomes available, yeah, that would help us to make DCT trials even more acceptable globally. And just aside from regulations and data privacy, we also need to recognize that as much as we want to design all our trials in a patient-centric manner, not all of the trials could use the decentralized options. Yeah, so some study medication would not be suitable for home delivery because of the indication or patient population or the procedures such imaging or radiotherapy. So we want to make sure that we want to continue to provide more flexible options to patients via DCT, but some of the constraints may remain there for foreseeable future. But overall, I think it's a very exciting time for the pharma industry and our partners, and most importantly, the patients. And we see how those innovations and things we try and we were forced to do during COVID now are becoming a part of day-to-day lives.
Exactly. So, Andrea, you mentioned before data privacy, and I would like to go a bit deeper on this. What are some of how do you manage data privacy and blinding concern around those decentralized clinical trials?
Yeah, this is really the question, how we can ship to a patient without knowing the address and the name. Yeah? And so we are working with the patient ID. Each patient is getting a number, and we are using only this number in all the communication. And just for the individual shipment, we need to receive patient address, yeah, and perhaps we have a nurse within, and only the name when it's needed, when only the patient is alone at home without a nurse. So we restrict the information we are getting to a minimum, and then we have just to operate just for the shipment, to keep this data and to deliver the shipment, and then it is not documented anywhere. And as also the devil is in the detail. It's really important to look at all documents. Not even an invoice should show up the patient's name or address. And in the ideal world, we are receiving not from the clinical side these data, because they are also overloaded and have a lot of work, and they are not logistics centers to book shipments and to coordinate everything. In the ideal world, an IT system which is able to handle encrypted data and on a regular basis could help us to provide this data. And here we are coming again back to the IoT provider who's really the best system and is used to work with blinded encrypted data.
Yeah. I'm happy you're saying that, Andrea. And as you already said, we should only collect those data that are really needed, and where the patient has informed consent given for. So we also do the data minimization approach, and that means we don't collect any patient or patient-sensitive data at all. Sites and couriers are the ones that need those data. The site, of course, the investigator, as he needs to know all kind of patient data, sensitive data, but you as a courier need to know where to deliver, to whom to deliver. And that's where we really start in, as I said, we don't collect the data, but we ensure that data are encrypted and masked, and nobody can access those data, can view this data as such, but we ensure that integration between systems can take place. So we would be able to share the encrypted data with you, and you, of course, by looking into the systems and by looking into the integrations, we would need to look into which data do you need and that you can view. But that's purely an integration matter that is needed for that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I can only add that as a sponsor, we really have the duty to protect the data that we collect. And we do rely on the processes and systems that we have in place that to operate with respect to existing regulations such as GDPR. And of course, then for that, we have to partner with service providers, such as what Andrea Hank described earlier, who have processes in place to ensure that the adequate measures are a part of their operating procedures. So we all own this together.
And sorry, Hank, do you want to add something? No. And it's also you as a sponsor and as a pharma company, what are the biggest risks or challenges that prevent you from adopting decentralization?
Yeah, at the moment, as you can appreciate, it is really adding to complexity because of all those unknowns that we discussed before regarding regulations, the constraints and lack of standardization. So right now we're in a phase where we know we can, but there is this sort of reluctance on how much we can scale it up, especially in a large global trial. Because we have to deal with those countries and regions with different levels of acceptance. Not all the technical solutions are available across countries. The variety between the countries in terms of the regulatory ethics committees and even sites and institutions, their level of comfort with DCT, and especially patients, that we have to take all of that into consideration, how much decentralization we can do for the trial. So it may take some time before it becomes the norm. We hope it will. But then what we see is, and I mentioned this earlier, that there is this shift in clinical practice towards more flexible and remote care happening. So I think that's a boost, that's helpful. In terms of the risks and challenges, we do rely and we do need novel technology and digital solutions. And this is a very rapidly evolving field. So for all of those solutions that we use in clinical trials, of course, there are also requirements such as validation, qualification, etc., before the data we gather can be used and considered valid for regulatory purposes. So it takes more time, it takes more consideration to incorporate all of those things into study design, especially for pivotal trial. And of course, I don't want to repeat that, but the concerns regarding data privacy, very important to us. Spend a lot of time making sure that we address those concerns. And overall, as for the sponsors, the safety of the patients comes first. So that will always guide the way we design and conduct our trials.
That's very important. And naturally, so I would like to focus more on the direct-to-patient trials. So Hank gave us a great overview in his introduction. Anita, back at you. What are the challenges and benefits of direct-to-patient adoption that you have experienced?
Yeah, so you would think that of those components, then direct-to-patient drug shipment is the very straightforward one. And from the outside, it may look like this. Yeah, we live in the world that we, like have our groceries delivered to our home. So direct to patient, not far off, I think. But it's actually very complicated. I would like to start with benefits because that's why we do it. So, if you're a patient, then imagine that for the drug with established safety profile that, again, we know a lot of already, stable formulation, we have a trial that sometimes take many, many years. The patients would appreciate that they don't have to travel specifically for the sites, really mainly to pick up the study medication. So starting from there, you see that, then participation in the trial will become more attractive for the patients. And you could open up participation in the trial for those patients who otherwise will not be able or willing to travel to the sites, and thus offer the trial to more patients to be more inclusive and more diverse in whom we enroll in the trial. So definitely that's the biggest benefit we can think of that DTP could give us collectively, our sites, our patients. Well, the challenges, again, I don't want to repeat, but it's those regulatory constraints in the countries, interpretation of data privacy and regulation, the main ones. Yeah, the concerns about the chain of custody, medical oversight by the investigator side, that will take some time to clarify and overcome, I think. So overall, I think there are the benefits overweigh, and the challenges will continue to work through them. But if we could really realize that those benefits and then open up the trials to more patients, that would ideally shorten our recruitment time period. And in turn, if that could shorten the duration of the trial, you could offer the drug to the market, to the patients sooner. So ultimately, that's something we would like to achieve.
And is it possible to transition back and forth between traditional and direct-to-patient models in the same study?
Yes, it is. So, well, of course, you have to design your study accordingly, and your protocol has to allow for that. But there are different levels of decentralization, different models. Yeah, so you can have a model where there are very few, or no sites, and then, of course, it's very hard to open up more sites at a short notice. But if you have a trial that's that all the drug is shipped directly to patients and everything is performed online, and you don't have really to have any base, any sites with independent investigator, then suddenly switching from direct to patient to non-direct to patient is harder, because you have to find the sites, start them up. But in theory, and COVID demonstrated, then switching from site-based to direct to patient is possible.
Yeah, and we see this as well, and I would say the majority of the trials where we are involved in have both models in parallel. So it's an option for the patient, and they can decide also even on short notice if they want to go to the site or if they want to get a home delivery. Of course, it's also a challenge for a courier because it's difficult to plan, and we have to provide this solution, often temperature controlled with the validated qualified packages on very short notice. This is also an additional challenge, but this is really the typical situation. The patient has the choice, and then we are delivering to the patient's home. This is a different situation when we have really a very temperature sensitive drug, for example, a cold drug or a frozen drug. And here in this case, this is also a better possibility, a more safe possibility to ship to the patient's home with a qualified logistics solution, instead of giving the patient just a cool bag and the patient is fully responsible to carry the medication to their home. And so some kinds of trials are only possible in this model when a nurse is waiting for the infusion, for example, the courier is bringing in temperature controlled packaging the very temperature sensitive drug, and then the patient can be treated in an outpatient setting.
And if you look to our IT system, that's not a challenge to go back and forth. It depends, of course, on what you have in your protocol. If you expect that patients and visits will be opting in and out for DTP, and you have built a system accordingly, then it's easy to switch from one to the other. And even if it is a hybrid model, we are able to quickly switch from DTP to visit at the investigator site. It's just a matter of changing the status of that site in that specific trial and that specific visit. So as long as you plan ahead, it can be done very, very easy. Yeah.
And it's based on your experience so far and what we've been discussing so far today. Do you plan to use decentralized elements in your future trials?
Very much so. So I mentioned earlier, we have actually established a dedicated function within Bayer Clinical Development Operations. It's called DCT, Strategy and Implementation. And the team is there to guide the study teams how to make the trials more patient-centric, what are the flexible options we could offer, and really look holistically which solutions go hand in hand. So e-consent goes with ePro, goes with eDiary or COA, and then if you add telemedicine and DTP, that's your whole package, so to speak. So we are very excited to be doing this, despite all those challenges and constraints we mentioned earlier. But being able to plan for the future trials, with first patient, first visits, years in the future, then we are already, the planning has to start now, and it's very exciting time to be planning for those trials with those options available for the patients.
And what about you, Andrea and Hank? How are you planning to support Bayer and other sponsors?
Definitely, we have a lot of innovations and technology integrations and planning, so that we have what we have discussed, that to be fully integrated, to get the bookings from the systems, to integrated with decentralized trial IT providers platforms. And what's also very important, and we are looking into setting up really a pharmacy depot to patient delivery, which would release the clinical site from storing and from managing all these shipments, but of course, under oversight of the investigator. This is really an important GCP requirement, that the investigator has always the responsibility and the oversight. And what's also very important for us to look into in new intelligent packaging solutions, small, fast for setup, and also a cultural change, because the drivers, this is no more Amazon. This is really, they are part of the clinical team, part of the team to really help for the health of the patient and for the well-being. This is also something where we have to, as logistics, people can really contribute.
And we are working on easy integration between our IoT system and other clinical software systems like EDC, ECOA, patient recruitment, temperature management. So that's what we want to work on, that all data goes seamlessly from one system to the other. And we want to provide an integrated solution. So we are working on making patient entry into a study and patient data collection more seamless by offering our own e-consent and ECOA solutions. And bringing these products together, we are working to streamline and further automate the patient and the site workflow between consent, screening, dispensation, and the completion of the diaries and assessments. Yeah, that's what we are thinking about.
Fantastic. So now, as a conclusion question, I would like to ask each of you, how do you see clinical trials evolving in the next few years? Aneta, maybe you want to start?
Yeah, of course. And then who would think, like a year or a year and a half ago, how dramatically, DCT has accelerated over the time. And of course, that was partially due to the pandemic. So what we don't want to do is we don't want to lose the momentum, and then gradually revert back to the traditional ways. And I'm personally an optimistic person and believe in the power of science and innovation. And then as an industry and our partners, that we are embracing this opportunity, to make the trial participation easier, more convenient to the patient, also less burdensome for the sites. And the industry needs to modernize. So we're talking about patient centricity. There is a lot also happening in terms of the data flow and all of the computing, the technology behind that. But we can achieve the modernization also by having an ongoing dialogue with regulators. So we mentioned on several occasions today that there are constraints with regulations. So by having this ongoing dialogue with regulators to address how we want to do certain things, how we are planning to address the currently existing barriers, it's key. So it is very encouraging to see that FDA and EMA and also some other countries such as Denmark have already issued guidance. So they are paving the way for more wide adoption of DCT in the near future, and that gives us, hope that DCT is there to stay. It will evolve, but it's here. True thoughts, Andrea.
From the world perspective, we also expect that we will have an increase and also much more, not only the drugs, but also all these wearable sensors, all the technical equipment. The patients really need the best support, that they have everything in their home available, but we have to make it very good, and not increasing burden, but really to make their life easier, life of the investigators easier. So it's also a very high responsibility for us that we can really achieve this. And I think then at the end, the patients, they will request it. This is the voice of the patients. This what's driving then really this development.
And I can only agree on this, that decentralized solutions will become more and more the standard. That's true, that's for sure. Sponsors will spend less time figuring out all the moving parts of disparate clinical components and systems. That's also something that will happen in the future. And it's really about making, as Andrea already said, making the life easier, not only for the investigator, not only for the sponsor, but at last, but not for sure, at least, making the life of the patient easier. And so we will really go into a future of decentralized trials. And it's all about collaboration between all the parties, communication between all the parties, and last but not least, the integration between the systems. That's really something where, you cannot go around that.
Thank you so much. Thank you for all your conclusions, and thank you for that great session today. So I think from my side, what I'm taking away today is that decentralized clinical trials are here to stay, and they are really impacting clinical research forever and having a real impact on the different stakeholders, like being patients, sites, sponsors, etc. So it's really good. So really, thank you so much to each of you for being here with us today and for sharing your knowledge and expertise. It was very, very insightful. And thank you everybody also for joining us for that event tonight. So it will be published on the Barcelona Health Hub YouTube channel, so you'll be able to replay it or view it if you've missed a part of it. So now just a few words to close the session. So what's next for Barcelona Health Hub? We will have our next BHHSeries in 2 weeks on the 22nd of September at 11 in the morning. So that's new time for change. And we're very happy to co-organize that event with Medicon Valley Alliance from Denmark and in collaboration with BioT. So the topic of that next BHHSeries will be around medical devices. So it'll be a very hands-on session where we will discuss how to transform your medical device into a compliant connected care solution in less than 4 months. And then if it's not in your calendar yet, it should be. The this year BHH Summit, our annual events, will be held on the 28th of October. So it's a one-day event, all in English. And the topic this year is the patient journey of the future. So you can find more information on our website, barcelonahealth.com. So thanks everybody for coming. Thank you, Hank. Thank you, Aneta. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Suvoda, for supporting us today. It was a pleasure to organize that event with you. And we see you on the 22nd of September. Have a nice evening.
Thank you all. Bye-bye. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.